Greetings, class. Today we're going to start with Chapter 6, which is the bones and skeletal tissue. So if you're looking forward, this PowerPoint should be in your Module 6, just in case you aren't able to find it. So the important things to take away from this Chapter 6 are the overall structure of bone, the tiny components that actually make up the bone, and the purpose of bone. Why do we have bones? So let's go ahead and start with the three basic types of a structural tissue called cartilage. Now, cartilage can actually be a component for bone building, but there are three separate types of it, and we're going to go through these three separate types. It's very important to remember where these can be found throughout the body. So the first type that we'll talk about will be the hyaline cartilage. I'm going to get my pin out right here. So we have hyaline cartilage. This is the most abundant type of cartilage. So if it's not elastic, it's not fibro, it's going to be hyaline. This is going to be the one that provides a lot of support, flexibility, resilience, and these are going to give our bodies a lot of support. So next up, we have elastic cartilage. So this is typically only found in a couple places. Of course, it is composed of elastic fibers. So think of the ear and the epiglottis. So E for elastic, E for ear, E for epiglottis. And then lastly, we have fibrocartilage. This is typically found in places that have a very high amount of stress applied to them on a daily basis. So think of the knee, the intervertebral discs, right? Those are the places that are going to be the most weight bearing. So they're going to have that fibrocartilage. All right, let's take a look. All right, so you see here, cartilage of the ear going to be in green for elastic, right? So elastic cartilage is green. And then here you would find the epiglottis. It's not mentioned on this picture, but it is, here we go, right here, a little tiny flap that covers the trachea, which is the windpipe, whenever we're swallowing something down the esophagus, so that we're not inhaling those food or drink particles down into our lungs. For fibrocartilage, this is going to be our red. All right. So look here. So the knee, right? So think of maybe the places that have to be replaced a lot as we get older, right? So the knee, or things that are kind of wearing down, right? So the knee is going to bear a lot of our weight. We also have a lot in something called the pubic symphysis, if you see right here. And this is where the two pubic bones, the os coxae, they bind together. And it's very good to be flexible, especially in women who are going to have children. And of course, then the cartilage in the intervertebral discs. All right, and then everywhere else is where you're going to find this hyaline cartilage, everything else in blue, all right? So whenever you're taking tests, it's always good to remember which things are not like the others. So if you can remember that, elastic cartilage is found in things that start with E, epiglottis, and ear. They're pretty much only two places that we'll talk about. Think of fibrocartilage. Think of places that are going to carry a lot of weight, all right? And then everything else is going to be hyaline. All right, so for cartilage, it actually grows in one of two ways. There is something called apositional growth. So with this type of cartilage growth, the new matrix is laid down on the top of the cartilage, all right? But for interstitial growth, this new matrix is made within the cartilage, all right? So coming from within, think of interstitial. And then appositional is just the other one, right? This is on the surface of that cartilage. All right, let's look at the functions of bone. So there are 7 important functions that our bones perform for us on a daily basis. They provide support, right? For our body, they help us to stand up straight. For our body, they also provide protection for our organs, right? So think of our brain. The bone that protects our brain, or the bones, would be the skull, right? So we have a spinal cord and also our other vital organs that are surrounded by bony protection. They help with movement. There are also storage facilities for mineral and growth factors. So things like calcium and phosphorus and other growth factors. All right, they also help with blood cell formation. This fancy word here is called hematopoiesis. So this occurs in red bone marrow, and it helps to produce all the cells that are found within the blood. So our white blood cells, our red blood cells, and our platelets. We also have fat storage. So this is going to be found more in those hollow cavities. Think more of a yellow marrow. All right. And then lastly, they actually produce hormones as well. There is something called osteocalcin. So anytime you see this beginning of osteo, this refers to bone. All right. So osteo. So osteocalcin is released by bones to regulate insulin, glucose, and also help with our metabolism. So really, really important functions. So something to remember, there are 206 bones in the human skeleton, and they are divided into two main groups. So the middle group is the axial skeleton. This consists of the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage. And then the appendicular skeleton. So think of our limbs, right? So think of things that are going on the side. Think of appendages, right? Appendages, appendicular. So let me show you a picture if we have it here. Here we go. So right here in the middle, think of things on the axis, how they're turning on the axis, right? So right here in the middle, our axial skeleton, our skull, our vertebral column, our rib cage, and then our appendages, the appendicular skeleton. So our arms and legs, right? Okay, so if you want to look at that. All right, so now we move on to the different classifications of bones based on their shape. So there are four main shapes that we classify bones on. There are long bones, and of course, just like they sound, they are longer than they are wide. So think of your humerus, which is a long bone, your femur, so think of the arm and leg bones. Next up, we have short bones. These are usually more of a cube-shaped bone found in our wrists and ankles. They also can consist of sesamoid bones. So sesamoid bones, for instance, we have a patella, which is our knee bone. If you want to reach down right here while you're listening to this and go ahead and try to wiggle your knee, that little bone right on the front is the patella. We also have sesamoid bones within our thumb. All right, flat bones, these are thin, usually kind of curved a little bit. So think of your sternum. So what the sternum is also known as the breastplate, right? Your scapula, these are going to be your shoulder bones, your ribs, and most skull bones. And then lastly, we have the irregular bones. These are going to have really special shapes, so they're really easy to pick out. So let's take a look back at our little skeleton. First up, we have our long bone. This is called the humerus. We will go over these next week for our next chapter, for chapter 7. I do recommend trying to get down a few of the bones starting now because it can get to be a lot, right? Because we do have hundreds of bones. All right, so long bone. B, we have our irregular bone, very special shape. So this is a vertebral or vertebrae. So this is found in the spine. For C, we have a flat bone. This is the sternum. This will be found right here where the ribs connect. And then lastly, we have a short bone. So for this one, we have a talus, which is one of the bones of the foot. All right, so now let's get a little bit smaller. So let's go ahead and talk about the two other types of bones. So for our gross anatomy, the larger types we can actually see with the naked eye. So we have compact bone and we have spongy bone. So compact bone is going to be the hard, dense bone. And this is usually going to be the outer layer of every bone that's going to appear smooth and solid. Within that compact bone, we then have spongy bone. And so with the spongy bone, there are a lot of I like to think of them as maybe railroad tracks, kind of little spikes. These are called trabeculae. And then within the trabeculae, you have red and yellow bone marrow. Typically, red marrow is going to be hematopoietic, which means it produces blood cells. And yellow bone marrow is going to be meant for fat storage. All right, let's take a look. So we have our compact bone. This is going to the bone right here in that more of a dense, kind of shiny white, right? And then we have spongy bone. So think of a sponge, right here. It looks porous. It doesn't look like it has a very regular shape within it. And this is going to be the spongy bone, made up of those little tiny spikes called trabeculae. All right, so the structure of a typical long bone, we'll go through that. So let's go down through our picture to make it kind of easier for us to recognize things. So here's our humerus. This is the long bone of the arm. So the shaft of a long bone, if you see from here to here, this is our diaphysis. Think of maybe diameter. The diaphysis is going to be the long portion or the shaft of that long bone. Okay. Next up, there are two epiphyses. So we have a proximal epiphysis. So these are going to be closer. So if it's proximal, that means it's going to be closer to the head. If it's distal, it's further away from the head. But these are going to be, think of the end pieces that are more rounded, more irregularly shaped. And then within kind of right here between the diaphysis and the epiphysis, we have the epiphyseal line or epiphyseal plate, depending on how old the person is. We can also call this the growth plate. So this is the most active during puberty, and then it closes up about 18 to 21 when most people stop growing. All right, if you look within, the outer portion of this bone, of course, is that compact bone with our spongy bone, if you notice right here within these epiphyses and in the diaphysis. And then if you look right here in the middle, you'll see a little canal. This is called the medullary cavity. Right? So you're going to have maybe some fat storage, some blood cell production, and then you see the bone is supplied by blood vessels. So this is how the bone gets its oxygen and nutrients. And then you see a little bit of yellow bone marrow right here. All right, so after we have the different portions of the bone, we also have different membranes. So think of a membrane as maybe a thin kind of sheer sheet that overlies or is kind of covering the inside of the bone. So the periosteum is going to be on the bone surface, and the endosteum is going to be inside the bone right here. Endosteum is going to cover the internal bone surface. All right, so let's take a look. So periosteum, and it's actually peeled back for us right here so you can kind of get a better look at it. And then the endosteum. So think of more of this as lining that medullary cavity. So peri means around, right? Or to cover. While in or endo means internal or inside of something. So kind of an easier way to remember these different names. Right here we have an artery taking blood into the bone. All right. All right, so we talked about red marrow. So usually this is found in many more places in newborns. So if something is a red bone marrow, remember this is blood cell producing, something called hematopoiesis, or it can be known as hematopoietic tissue. So this is found within the trabecular cavities of spongy bone and the diploe of flat bones, so sometimes the sternum. So in newborns, these medullary cavities and all the spongy bone contain red marrow. But as we age, there aren't that many places that actually contain red marrow. Typically, those places are now going to be located in the heads of the femur, and the femur is the thigh bone, and the humerus. So the humerus is the upper arm bone. All right, and these are going to be the long bones. So in case you get a question like this, where are the most common places for red bone marrow to be found in adults? It would be in our long bones, so our head of femur and our humerus. All right, so there are many different types of bone markings that we have that we call them all different types of names. So let's go over a few, but then I'll leave this table for you guys to go ahead and look over on your own because I do not want to make it too long for you all. So let's look at a few. So here is something called a trochanter. If you look right here, this little pieces right here. So these are kind of large, blunt, kind of a really weird shape. and we have them on the femur. And that's really important for different connections or different attachments of muscles. So let's look for another good one. We have a tubercle. This is kind of a rounded projection. I don't see one on here. All right. We have condyles, their spines, and then processes. Anything that's a process is going to be a bony prominence. So that also sticks out. So for example, on this vertebrae right here, we have a spiny process. Okay. So some other things that are important. We have condyles. These are rounded. They're called articular projections because they do articulate with other bones. A foramen is a hole, kind of a round or more ovalish opening, and it allows different blood vessels, nerves, different things to pass through. All right, so let me kind of get through out of that one. All right, so let's go through the 5 bone cell types. So I would make sure that I remember these, maybe make a little flashcard or just kind of do some word association. So first off, we have osteogenic cells. So these are going to be the stem cells of the bone. These are actively dividing, so they are called mitotic. So if you remember from the earlier chapters, we talked about mitosis, right? Which is the way that cells divide. So these are mitotic. All right, so osteogenic. So maybe think of genesis, being created, those things like that. All right, remember that osteo refers to bone. Osteoblasts are bone building. So these are also mitotic. So when I think of osteoblast, I think of B for building. All right. Osteocytes are mature bone cells. Typically not actively dividing. We have our bone lining cells. These help to maintain the matrix, which helps with the nutrients for the bone. And then we have osteoclasts. So this refers to something called bone resorption. So bones are being broken down. I like to think of the C in osteoclast for chewing. So think of bones being chewed up. So they are actually chewed up with different acids, enzymes, things like that, so that the calcium can get out of the bone and typically back into the bloodstream. All right, so osteoclasts, C for chewing, these chew up bone, and osteoblast, B for building, these build up the bone. All right, let's take a little look at the different pictures. All right, so first off, we have our osteoprogenitor cell. This is that stem cell. So some of them can actually become osteoblasts, which are the bone building cells, responsible for bone growth, of course. All right, so we have a couple other cells. So osteoblast and osteocytes. So remember osteocytes, osteo means bone and cyte means cell. So just your typical bone cell, a mature bone cell. These are from a bone cell lineage. On the other hand, osteoclast, remember those are these chew up bone. These are from white blood cell lineage. And if you remember anything about white blood cells, you know they are part of our immune system. And some of those cells, especially macrophages, they go in and just engulf and digest things. So kind of similar to this osteoclast. All right, so next up, let's talk about our compact bone a little bit more. There are quite a few just details. So what I suggest if you're trying to go ahead and look at these different types of compact bone, to go ahead, just sit down and draw it out and then label the different portions. So what I would suggest, so let me show you a picture of a osteon, a pretty good picture. Here we go. So these little circles right here. These are going to be the osteons of the bone, and there are a few different parts to it, okay? So let me show you a better picture. So I can scroll back up here. All right, here we go. So the major components of that compact bone would be the osteon, which is the structural unit of compact bone. We also have canals and canaliculi. Then there are also interstitial and circumferential lamellae, and we'll talk about all those new words. So the osteons, they were known as the Haversian system, but now they're osteons. It's a cylinder consists of several rings of bone metrics, and these are called lamellae. So remember I showed the little picture. So when they say several rings, here are several rings, and these rings are called lamellae. Okay, so each ring, these are called lamellae, while the osteon is this ring as a whole. Okay, so just to differentiate between the two. So lamellae are the rings. All right, so if we look at a osteon from the side, you see we have our lamellae, a little bit easier to pick out, right? The different rings that are right here. We also have different collagen fibers to provide support. And then the things that are going to be within that central canal, we're going to have an artery with capillaries, and arteries always take blood away from the heart to the different tissues of our bodies. We have a vein, so think of this blue structure right here. So veins take blood back to the heart to get re-oxygenated. And then capillaries are exchange vessels, so they help with the exchange of oxygen and nutrients. And then we have a nerve. So typically, an artery, a vein, and a nerve typically always travel together. We call them the van. So vein, artery, and nerve. And typically if they travel together, they have the same name or a similar name. Not always, but a lot of times. All right. Okay, so there's also that central canal that runs through the core of that osteon. Let me draw my little osteon again. So these are my lamellae. Right here would be the central canal. All right, that's going to have the vein, artery, and nerves. Next up, we have these perforating, used to be known as Volkmann's canals. These canals are lined with endosteum that occur at right angles to the central canal. So these help with connecting blood vessels and the nerves of the periosteum, the medullary cavity, and the central canal all together. All right, so within these different canals, they have different cavities, little tiny small cavities called lacunae. And these lacunae contain osteocytes, so those bone cells. Radiating out of the lacunae are something called canaliculi. These are little canals that connect those individual lacunae, and they help with exchange of nutrients and information. Okay, so let's take a look at the structure of the bone as a whole. So these little circles, remember, these are our osteons. Right? The whole thing is the osteon. The little circles are the lamellae. The middle portion right here is the central canal that has the vein, artery, and nerve. And then coming in at a right angle, we have our perforating canal or Volkmann's canal. And you see how we have the vein, artery, and nerve going down the center, and then we have that right angle, and that helps to just help with the increased exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and wastes. Okay, all right, so let's take a little bit closer look. So this is our osteon again. Let's look at figure B. So right here, you see we have our central canal, kind of just cut off a little slice. We have our canaliculi. Okay, so kind of hard to see, but little lines that are attaching the osteocytes in their little beds. Kind of think of them like sleeping in there in little beds called lacunae. So the lacunae are these larger orange portions right here. And the canaliculi are the little lines that are coming out to interconnect them. Okay. All right, so I know that's kind of a lot of stuff, but like I said, I would recommend maybe just sitting down if you like to look at pictures and that helps you, or if you like to draw your own pictures and actually start to draw out the different parts of the osteons. All right, so let's go on now to spongy bone. We talked about compact bone. Let's talk about spongy bone. So this actually allows bones to resist stress. They don't have osteons, but they do have capillaries to help supply nutrients, and they have a lot of those trabeculae, those little train tracks that help to strengthen that spongy bone. So let's take a look at it. So a lot of spongy bone is found sandwiched between compact bone. So if you kind of take this little cross section of our skull, we have our compact bone on the outside and the spongy bone in the middle to help resist stress. So it does look very unorganized, not very neat, but it does have a specific structure and function in mind to go ahead and provide strength and flexibility for our bones. So let's look at some of the chemical composition of bones. The bones are made up of organic components and inorganic components. The organic components are responsible for bone resiliency and flexibility. So it's mainly composed of collagen, which is type 1 in bone, type 2 in cartilage, and something called proteoglycans. And this is a protein with a sugar attached. Inorganic components make up the majority of bone. A lot of these are made up of something called hydroxyapatites, which are mineral salts. And this is what allows the bone to have a nice, be nice and hard and firm and resist compression. All right, so organic compounds help with flexibility. Inorganic components help with strength. All right, so now let's get to bone development, and this is a process that is very important to remember. So bone development or production of new bone is something called ossification or osteogenesis. So something to remember is that the formation of the skeleton or bones starts in month 2 of fetal development. You might see it also written as 8 weeks. So I do recommend knowing it both ways. I know it seems simple, but sometimes information is presented in ways you have not seen before, and it can be a little bit confusing. So it begins at month 2 of fetal development. Postnatal bone growth does continue on until early adulthood. And then, of course, bone remodeling and repair are lifelong. There are a couple bones that are pretty much never fully remodeled, and that's going to be the femur because it is so long and thick. All right, so let's talk about the different types of bone formation. So remember, week 8, we start getting that bony skeleton formed from cartilage typically. So we're either going to have endochondral ossification or we're going to have intramembranous ossification. So endochondral, so con or chondro, so that prefix, con or chondro, a little O right here, this is going to represent cartilage. All right, so this is how bone is formed by replacing hyaline cartilage. Remember, hyaline cartilage is that most abundant cartilage that we have within our bodies. So this is actually going to form most of the skeleton. Then we have intramembranous ossification. So this is where bone develops, just like it sounds, from a membrane, a fibrous membrane. So not a lot of bones are formed from intramembranous ossification. These are typically going to be the bones that are above the neck and the clavicles. And then for endochondral ossification, those are going to be most of the other bones that we find within the body. All right, so our endochondral, so all the bones that are inferior to the base of the skull, except the clavicles. Remember we said this begins about month 2 of development. It uses that hyaline cartilage as a model and then is replaced with bone. So let's now look at the 5-step process to endochondral ossification in a long bone. So this is something that you might see pop up on your tests and quizzes. So first off, a bony color forms around the diaphysis, remember that, of the hyaline cartilage model. So everything in blue right here, this is our hyaline cartilage. And now you see the diaphysis or the shaft of this soon to be long bone. You have this kind of bony collar forming on the outside. All right, so step 2, the cartilage starts to calcify. It starts to harden in the center of the diaphysis and then develops little cavities. Okay, step 3, the periosteal bud invades the internal cavities and the spongy bone starts to form. Step 4, the diaphysis elongates and a medullary cavity forms. Remember, the medullary cavity is that middle portion. All right, then step 5, the epiphyses ossify. So they get bones in the epiphyses that were not there before. When ossification is complete, hyaline cartilage remains only in the epiphyseal plates and articular cartilage. And so articular, these are typically going to articulate within their bone, and this is what's going to start, it's going to connect to the joint eventually. All right, so let's talk about intramembranous ossification. It does have a different process. Remember, these are going to be the bones of the skull and, of course, the clavicles. Okay, so let's look at these 4 steps. So step 1, the ossification centers develop the fibrous connective tissue membranes. Step 2, osteoid is secreted and it also calcifies, so it starts to get hard. Then we have, the osteoblasts continue to secrete osteoid, which calcifies in a few days. All right, so number 3, immature spongy bone and periosteum form. And then step 4, you get compact bone replaces the immature spongy bone just deep to the periosteum, and the red marrow starts to develop. All right, so let's look at the different growth in the length of long bones. If you guys want to go ahead and review this. So we have the resting zones, the proliferation zones, hypertrophic zone, calcification zone, and ossification zones. So knowing where they're found, and that's kind of what's happening, right? If something is resting, it doesn't really divide. So that's more of the inactive phases. Proliferation means to grow or to produce more of, right? So these are rapidly dividing. So the proliferation zone is actually the zone that causes lengthening of the bone. We have the hypertrophic. So hyper means above or more than enough, and then trophic is referring to growth. So these are going to be those older chondrocytes or those cartilage cells, right, that are close to the diaphysis, causing kind of a little bump. The calcification zone, just like it sounds, the matrix starts to calcify and harden. And then we have the ossification and osteogenic zones, where that collagen is replaced with bone by those osteoclasts. Right, here's our picture of the different zones. Let me continue on so I'm not keeping you guys here too long. So our growth plate is something called the epiphyseal plate. And this is typically, like I said, mostly open near puberty when it is most active. And this starts to close. So for females, the epiphyseal plate starts to just become inactive or close around 18. And then for males, about 21 years of age. There are also different hormonal controls of bone growth. Growth hormone, which we'll cover more in the second part of anatomy and physiology. This has its greatest effect on muscle and skeletal tissue. We have thyroid hormone, testosterone, and estrogens. Okay. There are also a few different types of hormones that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about in a second parathyroid hormone and something called calcitonin. All right, so first let's look up bone remodeling and what that actually means, and then we'll apply our different hormones to them. So for a spongy bone, it's pretty much replaced every 3 to 4 weeks, so much more often, while compact bone is replaced about every 10 years, depending what kind of bone it is. Like I said, if it's a femur, it might not ever get fully replaced. So bone remodeling occurs with 2 different steps. It's going to have bone deposition and bone resorption, so bones being broken down. So the osteoclast, remember those are bone chewing, C for chewing. This is how these cells actually break down the matrix of bone by secreting lysosomal enzymes and something called protons or hydrogen ions that digest the matrix. And then osteoblasts, remember B for building, these are actually going to create more bone. All right, so the way that bone remodeling is controlled is through a process called negative feedback that controls the different levels of blood calcium levels. So calcium is very important. It helps with muscle function, heart contractions, blood coagulation, nerve transmission, just so many things that we need calcium for. A way that we can actually get calcium to be more fully absorbed in our bodies is to take it with vitamin D. So if you ever go to the store and you always see milk plus vitamin D, that's because vitamin D helps with calcium absorption. Bones can also be remodeled in response to mechanical stress. All right, so let's look at some of the main hormones that help with bone remodeling. We have parathyroid hormone, or PTH. These come from the parathyroid glands in the neck. These are typically going to be 2 on each side of the thyroid to the posterior. So what these do, they stimulate osteoclasts to resorb bone. So these osteoclasts start to chew up the bone, and by chewing up the bone, they help to release calcium, and that calcium is able to go into the blood and raise the calcium levels. All right, so once the optimal level of calcium has been reached in the blood, then PTH stops being produced. All right. But on the other hand, we have something called calcitonin, and this has pretty much the opposite effect of PTH. This is produced by C cells of the thyroid in response to high levels of calcium in the blood. So what this does, it takes the calcium out the blood and helps to build the bone up more by depositing that calcium into the bone or into our calcium pools. All right. And this picture just shows that negative feedback. All right. So let me kind of skip through. There are going to be more things that you should look at, maybe some bone anatomy and fractures. Okay, so let's look at how bones actually heal. It's a 4-step process, so 4 stages. So first we get a hematoma, which is kind of a blood bump, or think of maybe a blood tumor. Then we get our fibrocartilaginous callus. So fibrocartilage. Something to remember is that most scar tissue is called fibrocartilage. We then get a bony callus, and then we have full bone remodeling. All right, so now we're going towards the end of our lecture, and we're going to talk about some of the more clinical aspects of bone and the different bone diseases. So there's something called osteomalacia, where bones are poorly mineralized, and this results in soft and weak bones. There's something called rickets. So typically osteomalacia of children, and this is typically coming from a vitamin D deficiency or insufficient dietary calcium. All right, so next we have osteoporosis, which is something that you all may have heard about a little bit more than the other conditions we just talked about. It's a group of diseases in which bone resorption exceeds deposit. So that means the bone is kind of chewed up more than it is kind of built up by those osteoblasts. And what happens is that the bone gets even more spongy. So this first picture is the picture of a normal bone. The last picture is a bone affected by osteoporosis. You see there's much more holes, much more of a spongy appearance. They are not as strong. They break much more easily. All right, so one of the main diseases that are responsible for hip fractures, especially in the elderly. All right, so some risk factors for osteoporosis. They're most often going to be postmenopausal women. All right, so estrogen plays an important part in bone density, but of course, after menopause, that amount of estrogen drops drastically, which can result in osteoporosis. All right, so other risk factors, of course, besides just, naturally getting older, insufficient exercise. So we have to do weight-bearing exercises to make sure that our bones are nice and thick. So as we age, even though we're naturally going to lose the amount of bone, because we have built up our bones to a certain degree, as we age, it's not going to have such a serious side effect as osteoporosis. Or if you do, it won't be as bad. All right, a diet poor in calcium and protein. Smoking is always a huge risk factor for many diseases. It could be genetically linked. Let's say if your grandma or an aunt or even your mother had it. It could be hormone related or taking a lot of alcohol or other medications. All right, lastly, how do we treat osteoporosis? So of course with calcium, and it's always going to be calcium plus vitamin D, because that vitamin D is going to go ahead and reabsorb that calcium that's coming in through our food and taking it out to our bones. Doing a lot of weight bearing exercises. So going for a walk, it's a little bit of weight bearing, right? Maybe lifting some light weights. Hormone replacement therapy, which is very, very common, also known as HRT. So once a woman hits menopause, going ahead and getting HRT to reduce a lot of the side effects of menopause. It does slow down bone loss, but HRT, it has its own side effects, such as causing breast cancer, heart attacks, maybe strokes. It increases clots. It also causes softening of the jaw, which can cause a lot of jaw fractures. All right, so we have come to the end of the chapter 6 chapter. Like I said, this is not comprehensive of the entire chapter, but it is a pretty good review. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a great day.